Hello, welcome back to Ends and Means. I'm Amos Wallen. With Christmas approaching, I'm delighted to have JP Andrew on to talk about the ethics of lying to children about Father Christmas. JP, before we go ahead, could you just say a little about yourself?
Okay, yeah. So thanks for having me on, Amos. Yeah, it's fun. I to talk about these things. So I currently a visiting lecturer at Texas Christian University, which is in Fort Worth, Texas. I did my doctoral work at the University of Texas at Austin. I under Galen Strawson and Michelle Montague finished my PhD in May 2021, and I've been kind of just mostly teaching largely lower division courses ever since then. I teach a lot of kind of applied ethics type courses, and we talk about issues of this sort. So yeah, that's me. That's who I am. And this is also my dog here, Shelby. If people see her in the background, the bad views about Santa Claus are Shelby's fault, not mine.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems reasonable. Yeah, I once ended a paper by saying that any mistakes are the fault of the system. So uh, it's always just good to pass off responsibility.
There you go.
But could you lay out as best as you can your argument for why it's wrong to systematically lie to children about the existence of Father Christmas?
Okay, right. Yeah. And of course, I'm American, so to me, this is Santa Claus, but yeah, I trust people can translate. Um, no, okay. So Father Christmas, we'll say. Yeah, right. Okay. So this is just generally how I tend to think about ethical issues. I'm not the sort of person that has a particular moral theory that I'm totally convinced is true. And I just proceed to derive everything from this theory. So I tend to be interested in looking at issues from a plurality of moral perspectives. And so that's how I approach this issue. And what I notice is that it seems like most of the major moral frameworks, I at the very least have a kind of built-in presumption against lying, where lying involves, it's a rough working definition, the deliberate utterance of a falsehood with the intention of deception, or something along those lines. That's what it is to lie. I Okay, so let's kind of take take a couple of major viewpoints here. First, let's think from a Kantian perspective. I mean, so Kant, as people will probably know, has very extreme views about this. He thinks that it's always wrong to lie. That's how he's ordinarily understood, right? So the categorical imperative says basically you should only act on on maxims or principles that can be universalized without resulting in some sort of inconsistency. And so he thinks, well, you can't universalize the maxim you should tell that I'll tell lies, because in a world where everybody lies, then the very institution of truthful communication breaks down. We also sort of treat people as mere objects if we lie to them for our own selfish ends or something like that. So Kant's going to say you have to never tell a lie. So obviously, if you're just a completely diehard Kantian, then you would say, well, you shouldn't lie to children about Father Christmas because you shouldn't lie ever. Okay. Um, Now, I don't endorse that kind of view, right? So there's the typical sort of objection to Kant's line is, well, like you can imagine that you're in 1930s Germany and you have, you're hiding innocent Jewish people in your attic or something, and the Nazis come knocking on the door and they ask if there are any innocent Jewish people living here. I you gotta lie if that's what it takes to get the Nazis away, right? And so I think like most normal people on reflection think, okay, yeah, like there are some cases where it seems like lying could be permissible. But I think what we can take out of the Kantian perspective is that nevertheless, there's even if we're not rigorists like Kant, where we think the moral duties are absolute, nevertheless, there's a kind of presumption against lying from this sort of deontological perspective. Okay, so that's one view that we could take. Um, Now, it's sort of a more moderate deontological view would say, well, it seems like we all have an interest in knowing what's true, and so you should understand yourself as having at least a presumptive duty not to tell lies to people, because when you tell lies to people, then that thwarts their natural interest in attaining knowledge and coming to have true beliefs and so forth. I All right, so yeah, so there's a deontological presumption against lying. From a consequentialist perspective, it also seems like generally you shouldn't go around telling lies to people. So consequentialists think, I the moral status of an act is determined by its effects, by its consequences. And there's a crude version of this that I think people often imagine gives you the green light to tell a lot of lies, right? So like there's like a crude sort of utilitarianism, not the sort of utilitarianism that I think actual utilitarians defend, but some people will think, okay, well, utilitarians are just the people that think that you should always promote happiness. So, like tell lies, whatever that would make people happy or whatever. um, I Okay, but then if you step back and you think a little bit about a more nuanced consequentialist or more narrowly utilitarian perspective, you'll see that even on this sort of view, looks like you generally shouldn't tell lies because things go worse for us to the extent that we have a faulty model of reality, right? It's like, so it's harder to get around in the world if you have a false picture of what the world is like. And so you actually sort of impose a harm on people by lying to them because you're trying to convince them of something that is by your lights false. That's bad, right? And it's probably in the long term going to make them less happy. That would be Now, can you cook up cases where you ought to tell lies nevertheless on the nuanced utilitarian position? Yes, right. So I think like on none of these views is it going to be the case that lying about Father Christmas, i.e., Santa Claus, is wrong because lying is always wrong. So what we can get is just a kind of general presumption against lying. I guess one last perspective I'll just throw out there, and then we'll apply this specifically to Santa Claus. So natural. I don't know a ton about natural law theory, but natural law theorists will say, okay, like we have these sort of natural inclinations. Like one sort of inclination is to gain knowledge in beings like ourselves. Anyway, we're rational. We're striving to gain knowledge, and so if you lie to somebody, you're frustrating this natural inclination um, to gain knowledge, right? And so again, from that perspective, it looks like some sort of presumption against lying. Okay. So we can circle back to the more theoretical aspect of this later on if you want to. But yeah, so like we can bring all this together by saying, okay, on reflection, lots of moral theories seem to tell us don't lie generally. Okay, so what about Santa Claus? Could this be a case where there's an exception? So like the Nazi Germany case, that's one sort of exception where it seems like you can lie to save innocent people from being killed. What about lying to children to get them to believe in Father Christmas? I Okay, well, so here I think that I first I want to say, I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world, right? So like you're not you're not doing something evil by telling children the Santa Claus story. But is this generally a good practice? I think not. Okay, so couple of reasons. So one, there's this special sort of relationship between parents and those and other adults that are, like especially concerned with safeguarding the well-being of children. That are responsible for the well-being of children and the children themselves, right? And there's a kind of bond here that you don't want to corrode or corrupt in any sort of way. And at least the way that the Father Christmas story is sometimes told, they're kind of like fairly dramatic links that people will go to get to get children on board with this, right? So it's not merely portrayed as like a kind of fun story that we all know is false. Like people are working really hard to convince children no, like there actually is this old man in the sky that visits every single house in the world on Christmas night, whatever, and delivers gifts. Right. So this like really incredible thing that they go to great lengths to convince children is true. Okay, so one sort of problem there is that if they're successful, then they've succeeded in sort of helping children to believe something that's absurd, and so they're making children somewhat worse reasoners, making them more gullible. And they're also teaching children that maybe I can't really trust the people that are supposed to be telling me the truth that I'm supposed to trust. What else are they lying to me about? right? And that might be bad because like children need to be able to trust their caregivers. Okay. I Now another point to make, I think, is that the potential benefit is pretty minor, right? So like this is some fun, right? But that's it. And there are a lot of ways to have fun. There are probably a lot of ways to have fun, even with respect to the Father Christmas story, that don't involve actual deception, actual intensive deception, right? You could sort of tell the story and do this in sort of like a make believe, fun kind of way where we all know it's not true. So it's like the potential benefit seems pretty minor, whereas the potential harm seems somewhat significant. And so it just seems unlikely to me that this is one of those cases that would justify breaking the general rule: don't lie to people. Okay, so maybe I've been going on a while, so maybe I'll pause there, and then if you want to press me on a point, then feel free.
Yeah, sure. So I picked up on two general strains there. So one objection to lying to children is deontological, and the other is consequentialist. So on the deontological side, you're saying there's either a categorical or defeasible presumption against lying to children that holds regardless of what the consequences are. And then on the other side, there are also these really terrible consequences of lying to children about Santa. Not so terrible, maybe, but they become worse critical thinkers, and the trust between their epistemic authorities is corroded, etc., etc.
Yeah, good, right. Yeah.
So I'm not totally convinced on either side. I could be swayed.
Yeah, cool.
But on both points, I have worries. So maybe we should start with the deontological case against lying to children. So I agree that there is a deontological presumption against lying in general. But that one way to lift this presumption is through the presence of hypothetical or retrospective consent. So if it turns out that the vast majority of children, upon being lied to about Father Christmas and then finding out about it later in the future, went back and thought, this was totally fine, I had a lot of fun, and had I been in a position to consent, I would have given my consent. Obviously, the parents couldn't have asked the children's consent at the time because that would have ruined the whole thing. But looking back, if it turns out that the vast majority of people were happy to be lied to on this particular issue, then that seems to do away with the deontological objection. And so just to motivate this thought, imagine that you encounter a street magician, and the magician doesn't lie to you in a problematic way by really trying to get you to believe that he's doing magic, but he does lie to you in the course of the trick. So the trick is he produces a dove and everyone is amazed. And in the course of the trick, he lies and says, there's nothing up my sleeve. In fact, there's a dove up his sleeve. But he is really trying to get people to believe that there's nothing up his sleeve, because if people suspected that there was something up his sleeve, that would suck some of the force out of the trick. And so he lies and he does this trick and everyone is amazed, and they get a lot of fun out of it. I think almost no one would have an objection to the magician for having lied to them about there being nothing up his sleeve, because they had a lot of fun. The magician can expect that most people would give their consent to him lying to them. And so it's really an empirical question on this point, whether children would in fact consent in retrospect to being lied to about Father Christmas.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any research on whether people are okay with having been lied to. But maybe one test for whether children are okay with having been lied to is whether, when they have children, they themselves decide to inculcate the Santa myth into their children. And if they do, I think that's some evidence that they were totally fine in retrospect with being lied to about Santa on the whole. So what do you make of that kind of response?
Yeah, it's really good. I like that a lot. Okay, so one thought that comes to mind is, this is going to be sort of an annoying philosopher's point. I'm almost annoyed with myself for raising it, but I have to. So, an issue with the retrospective consent thing is that if people have been lied to about Father Christmas, and then they think, I would have agreed to that, if somebody had asked me, then they are running that hypothetical as somebody who's already been corrupted, right? So like they've they are the people. They're the people who are living with the consequences of being lied to about Father Christmas, and so maybe what they would agree to retrospectively is being polluted by the fact that they were in fact lied to about this, right?
Right.
Maybe we could be like, very annoying, hard-nosed philosophers and say, no, you ought to love truth. And so like if you become the kind of person that would agree to being deceived systematically over the course of years or something, then that's unfortunate, and you should just have this this diehard, unwavering love for truth that makes you not want to be deceived. Okay.
And if you take that line, does that mean you have to bite the bullet in the magician case? So do you have to say that the really hard-nosed, truth-seeking philosophers should say, no, it's unacceptable for magicians to lie about there being nothing up their sleeve?
Right, maybe. Right. So you could. I mean, although it might be that there are relevant disanalogies there. I don't. So one thing that comes to mind is that the magician thing, takes place over the course of a short period of time. And I took it. Maybe it's not an essential feature of your case that this is happening while I'm an adult that can consent and so forth, right? And so it's like if I decide I want to go to a magic show and be tricked, but then it's going to end. Then maybe there's something that's less worrying or less corrosive about that than being deceived over the course of a long period of time during a crucial developmental phase when I can't consent. Something like that. I don't know.
But so like that's a consequentialist consideration, right? It has to do with the corrosion of trust, not like lying being wrong as an act in itself.
Yeah, although maybe you could cash it out in a more deontological way that focuses specifically on being very precise about the sort of maxim that we're formulating. Like what is the maxim? What is the maxim exactly that I'm endorsing when I go to the magician's show or whatever? And also by sort of playing up the significance of consent. I did sort of describe that in a consequentialist way that I think I could re-describe it in a more deontological way also. Okay, but it's good. So, but also I would totally understand if some people were like, okay, yeah, this is just I'm not really convinced by that. Fair enough. Another potential response that comes to mind though is that we do live in a society where people don't really value truth telling to the extent that I think almost any of us would think is good, right? So like people will say that lying is wrong, and it's like being truthful is good, but then people lie like all the time, so like our epistemic environment, almost everybody would agree, probably like independent of ideological persuasion or whatever, is terrible. And so we could ask, well, what contributes to that? Maybe a very, very small part of it, is like that we're comfortable with engaging in acts of deception of the sort involved in convincing kids that Father Christmas is real. I don't know, right? Again, it'd be like a very, very minuscule part of it. But, like more plausible way of cashing this out is that the cultural environment in which something like that is totally normalized might be incompatible with having the sort of cultural environment in which people have a higher regard for truthfulness and honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so like, what do you make of the objection that that's just unattainable, right? So like, the goal of having a culture that just values truth in every case is literally unattainable. It's sort of like logically attainable, right? But practically, it's not attainable. And so, what we kind of ideal theorize and imagine what in an ideal world, what would the situation on truth telling be? We live in a non-ideal world, and so the rules are different. We don't have to aspire. We don't have to act as we would in an ideal society in a non-ideal world.
Yeah, I think that's good, right? So then I think the best response would be that I think I should just concede we're not going to reach the ideal world, sadly. But we can try to get closer to it than we currently are, right? And so then the argument would be that I one part of this, of taking a step, towards something closer to the ideal, would involve becoming less comfortable deceiving kids for fun, right? Including for their own enjoyment, for their own benefit, or their own perceived benefit. Am I
Right.
super persuaded by that? Not really, but I should also say to people that like um, I'm not like I'm not going to go to the mat on this. Like I do, I am inclined to think that this at least merits reflection if I'm causing people to reflect, and I think that's good. But yeah, there are at least
I agree, this is
considerations,
good.
I think.
No, this is great. You are causing me to reflect. I've always been in the pro lying to children camp, but now I'm not so sure.
I will say also,
So-
just that,
go on.
quickly, there are. I'm loath to bring this up because then people are going to start asking, well, like where are your like very well controlled experiments, and I don't have those. I don't know of good studies about this, but I can report that anecdotally, there are people that say that they were actually really upset by finding out that they had been lied to about this. I mean, I know some people like this. So I think it's we do have to bake in. Well, I don't want the case here to hinge on some kind of empirical claim that I can't substantiate with peer-reviewed journal articles or something. We shouldn't just sort of take for granted that all kids enjoy this and are totally unharmed and unaffected by it. I would think that like probably most, it's not that big of a deal, but some kids really are upset, and it might be worth thinking more about that. Like if there's a risk that a child's going to be like super distraught when they find out that Father Christmas is not real, and that their adults in their life have been lying to them, if they're going to be really upset, maybe you should err on the side of caution there. So just one more thought.
So like I think that is the strongest deontological argument, one based on moral risk.
Right.
So like I think it's clear that in the majority of cases, most people would give their retrospective consent to being lied to about Father Christmas. You can debate whether or not that has any evidential force. You gave a debunking argument against earlier, because if they've accepted the Santa myth at some point, it means they don't fully love truth. But so I think the strongest version of your argument will be there's some sizable minority of people who are extremely upset by finding out that their parents systematically deceived them about Father Christmas. And so to avoid the risk of your children being among those people, you should just refrain, given, as you said, that the benefits aren't actually that great. Yeah, people can enjoy Christmas without believing that Father Christmas is real, even if believing that he is real adds further depth to it. I guess my responses to that are twofold. So one, it seems like there are ways for parents who lie about Father Christmas to mitigate the risk, even while lying about Father Christmas, specifically in the manner that they choose to eventually reveal to the child that Father Christmas isn't real. So it seems like most of the anecdotes where people report being really upset about having been lied to about Santa are about cases where they found out abruptly. But for children who found out gradually, they'd sort of slowly ask their parents questions. And then at some point, their parents would stop lying as convincingly, and they'd sort of smile every time you asked a critical question, and they'd give a purposefully unconvincing answer. And then the child slowly works it out for themselves. Those children, I take it, are not going to be traumatized by having been lied to about Father Christmas. It's only the people who find out really abruptly who feel betrayed. And so if you want to lie to your kids about Santa, you can just mitigate the risk of them being very upset by revealing it in a gradual way. So what do you think about that as a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think I should grant that there if people are going to do the whole Father Christmas thing, there are better and worse ways of doing it, right? And so I endorse people doing the better versions of it if they're going to do it, right? So, I think that's right. Now, and I think it's a good insight that that there are probably people put thought into this. there certainly are going to be like ways that mitigate significantly against the risk. Not totally. So,
Mm.
that's one kind of annoying, but I think necessary point to make, right? Like you're still going to probably have, even in this better system, some number of children that do report being very resentful and traumatized, and like it erodes their trust of their parents and all that stuff. Nevertheless, you still have like some kind of risk there on the tail, even if it's reduced.
Yeah.
Um, but beyond that, I guess I would wonder, I like, as long as we're sort of being sensitive to the potential harms here in the first place, why not go all the way, towards me and just not get rid of the Father Christmas story entirely, but engage with that story in a way that signals recognition of it's not literally being true, right? So, I don't have this super worked out model here, but there is this kind of state that people occupy, you know, um, when they're playing games. What are some modes in which we do this, right? So like, I yeah, so think about when children are like really engrossed in a game that they're playing, and it's like they know it's just a game, but they're taking it super seriously and they're super into it and they're having all kinds of fun. And it seems like there's a way of kind of doing the whole Father Christmas thing, in a way that resembles this really robust kind of play, where like everybody knows it's not real, but they sure are acting like it's real. Something along those lines. I would imagine that like if we really put our minds into this, we can find some way of doing it that just didn't involve lying at all. And so I would say, given that lying's usually wrong, why not try that if that would be fun too?
Yeah. I mean, so one response would be twofold. So the first part is it's not as fun, right? So like Christian art is more enjoyable for Christians who think that the art really depicts the final destiny of humanity and the mind behind the universe than to an atheist who can appreciate the art for its cultural value but doesn't see it as depicting reality. And so like how much more amazing Christmas gets if you really believed in Father Christmas will vary from child to child. And so that's an empirical question. But another factor to consider might not just be the benefits of believing in Father Christmas for your enjoyment of Christmas, but also the potential harms that come from telling your child that Father Christmas isn't real in a culture where all of the other children believe that Father Christmas is real. So you can tell your child, don't tell other people at school that Father Christmas isn't real. And many children will be okay with doing that. But one risk we have to consider is that your child is annoying. And so like they will just tell other people and ruin it for everyone else. And it will get them into arguments. Maybe those arguments will be quite heated. Maybe they'll lose friends, even for just a small period of time. And so a parent might decide that when weighing up the risks, the risks of telling your child that Father Christmas isn't real are greater on the negative side than they are on the positive.
Good. Yeah, good. Okay. So I think one thing that jumps out at me here is that I think you are thinking about this, at least in the spirit of raising this challenge. I don't take it to be your view of it. You're thinking in a more explicitly, in more sort of convictedly utilitarian way than I am, kind of like weighing up harms and benefits. I think maybe one difference between us is that I'm thinking that at least since I'm open to the possibility that there's a really very strong deontological reason to almost never lie. To me, the sort of the justification for lying is going to be quite hard to meet. And so yeah, so I'm thinking there's a pretty strong standing reason not to tell lies, that, and I'm not going to think that I should start telling lies just because I'm projecting that it will bring benefits or something. Yeah, I would think that like given the way I'm thinking about lying, I would want to respond to the sort of real worries that you're raising in other ways, like sort of coaching kids to be less annoying, and like into not like get into needless arguments, controversies. There have some kind of pay some kind of respect, to the parenting practices of other families and so forth. I
Yeah. So like I guess the reason why I brought the utilitarian considerations into it, and we can move to the more explicitly utilitarian considerations in a moment, was that I guess in the kind of dialectic that we set up, my response to the deontological objection to lying to children was that, look, like the vast majority of children will retrospectively consent to being lied
okay,
to,
all right.
and your response was, oh, well, some children will be harmed by this, and wouldn't consent to it retrospectively, and so when we do the moral risk calculation, we should err on the side of caution.
Mhm.
And I guess when I'm thinking about moral risk, I'm appealing to what I'll call the "it's not that deep" principle. So in cases where the act in question isn't that deep, by which I mean it's not that bad, in the grand scale of lies that you could tell, it really matters how great the harms are and how great the expected benefits are when you're doing that moral risk calculation. And so, like, the utilitarian considerations are going to need to be brought into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Fair enough. I hear you. Yeah. Yeah. Um, then
Go.
maybe maybe I'll lob this back at you. So I feel like this maybe I should have brought this up earlier, but one other thing that comes to mind is that the Father Christmas story does arguably cause children to be unaware of a kind of debt of gratitude that they have to the people that are actually like buying presents and stuff for them, and that might be worth considering too. So like their parents are maybe like working quite hard to buy them gifts and go to a lot of effort to make sure they have a really good Christmas, and then they're giving their gratitude to a non-existent entity, right? Father Christmas. So maybe there's something worrying about that also, and also from
Okay.
a consequentialist perspective. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I find that argument interesting. The thing that immediately popped to mind is if this argument succeeds, it succeeds as a consideration not only against Father Christmas, but against Secret Santa. So, when families have a Secret Santa tradition, they don't tell the gift recipient who gave the gift, and so the recipient doesn't know to whom they owe the debt of gratitude. But like, everyone kind of consents to this arrangement, and they think, okay, the majority of presents will be given under our real names, but a subsection of the presents will be given secretly.
Hmm.
And like, I guess this seems fine to me. And if that's fine, Father Christmas also seems fine for the same reason.
Maybe I missed something in the description of the case, but if we're thinking about a Secret Santa situation where we have consenting adults who know the nature of the arrangement that they're getting into, that does seem different in kind to me from the situation where you have children that just have no idea, right, where the gifts are actually coming from. Um, at which point, of course, you could invoke
Yeah.
retroactive consent again, and we would get back into that, I guess.
True. Yeah. I mean, so like, what if I tweak the case? I'm sure there are people who have a Secret Santa situation that includes children who are very, very young, and so children who are too young to consent in the relevant way also receive one or two presents secretly from a relative that they don't know who to be thankful for. But what they do know is they're thankful to some person who I don't know the name of. And in the Santa case, they also have the thought I should be thankful to someone who I don't know the name of. They don't actually know who they should be thankful for because it's false that Santa gave them the present, and so
Yeah.
they don't know who to be thankful for. And so it seems like the situations are roughly the same. They get a present, they don't know who to be thankful for. And it kind of seems fine. Like as long as it's not going to distort their gratitude mechanisms in a bad way, then it seems fine. And I think there are reasons to think that it wouldn't distort the way the principles by which they apply gratitude to others, right? Because they're still abiding by the common sense principle that you owe gratitude to whoever gave you the gift. They just have a mistaken belief about who gave them the gift, and so it's not going to cause them to deploy gratitude inappropriately in the future.
Okay, good. I like so good response. I mean, I do see one kind of difference that does seem relevant to me, which is that in the modified Secret Santa case, the children are still aware of the set of people to whom they owe gratitude, and these are actual people. Whereas in the Santa case, that they're they're thinking that that this being that doesn't exist is owed their gratitude, right? So at
Mhm.
least in the first case, there's awareness that, there are these, adults in my life that care about my interests and are trying to do nice things for me, and I should be grateful to them at least for setting up this system that results in me getting a bunch of stuff that I probably don't need and won't use, right? But in the Santa case, we don't have that. So there is some kind of difference there. Maybe it doesn't matter, but
Yeah, yeah, it's true that there is a difference. I guess I'm thinking that it doesn't matter, or if it does matter, it doesn't matter very much. Um, so okay, so like, what I mean, what if I modify the case just one bit more?
yeah,
So suppose we live in a communist utopia where everyone is a member of our family,
okay.
um, and so like the
Inconceivable. I
set of
reject the parameters of
yeah.
complex. No, okay, sorry.
Right. And like the set of possible gift givers is just like maximally expanded, so like anyone could have given you the gifts,
Yeah,
including people you don't know exist, because you haven't met everyone on earth, and so like everyone's involved in the Secret Santa, including children who can't consent to the system, maybe.
yeah,
And I don't know, like it's like it doesn't seem impermissible to for like people to send off Secret Santa presents to children when the children won't know who to say thank you to.
hmm
Um,
hmm
like as long as they waive their right to have a thank you said to them, right? So people giving the Secret Santa gifts have sort of waived any obligation for the recipient to say thank you, precisely because it's secret. Um, and so it seems like the same thing could be going on in the Santa case. So parents give presents to children under the guise of them being from Father Christmas, but they waive their right to any corresponding thank you from the children. Um,
yeah.
so
Okay,
like,
good. And
I
so
don't know.
I like that. But all right, I don't know if this is going to be a great response, but something that does come to mind is that some people think that as a moral universe in which we have special relationships and special obligations is actually preferable to one in which there's just no partiality whatsoever. And so you might think that, well, in your communist utopia, we have to basically, sort of rewire our psychology in a way that's not good by the lights of these, where there's not, because and I guess Marx himself thought this, right? Like, so the traditional family comes under attack. We can't have like these little units that understand themselves to be like especially attached to one another. It breeds a kind of partiality that's incompatible with the broader system. And so, yeah, maybe the response here is that, like in order to have this version of the Secret Santa case, we have to like change ourselves into worse beings or something. We have to all be communists, and that's terrible. So there you go, QED.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, given that we're moving into the consequentialist considerations about this hypothetical case, maybe we should just like more directly move into the consequentialist considerations around Father Christmas.
Yeah, fair enough.
So you made the objection. You gave a few negative consequentialist considerations. One being that by systematically deceiving children into believing in something that's irrational, it will harm their critical thinking abilities, probably. And could you remind me what the other considerations were?
Yeah,
I think there were maybe
there's at least
one or two more.
a real risk there. Yeah, so there's that. There's the worry that there's some kind of corrosion that this brings in the caregiver child relationship, or at least the authority child relationship. Like if you think it's important that children should have respected authorities they can trust. And insofar as there's something like this that's pretty trivial, that at least stands some kind of plausible risk of undermining that, you might think it's not worth the risk. Something along those lines. Those are maybe the
Yeah.
two major considerations. Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the claim that it will potentially harm children's critical thinking abilities.
Yeah.
So maybe that's true. So I mean, Richard Dawkins is very much in favor of lying to children about Father Christmas, precisely for the opposite
I didn't know
reason.
this.
So
Okay.
yes, so he thinks that deceiving children about Father Christmas will, at some point in their life, when they start asking questions, cause them to develop critical thinking skills. When they start asking questions like, "Hey, why do rich families get more presents from Father Christmas than poor families?" And other logistical questions about how Santa works, and it will improve their critical thinking abilities just in the trivial sense that they're working on a problem, but B, and more importantly, it will teach them that a healthy skepticism of epistemic authorities in their life. So every authority in our life that tells us things is fallible, apart from God. So teaching children that these authorities are fallible and sometimes lie to them, and to figure their ways out of these lives can maybe engender a healthy skepticism of authority. And so actually it's good for their critical thinking abilities for most children if you systematically deceive them about Father Christmas.
Okay, good. Yeah. Was that it? I wasn't sure if there was more. Okay.
No, I mean that's the objection.
Okay.
I take it that neither you or Richard Dawkins has any study that can show one way or the other
Yeah.
that
Right.
this is so like
Maybe that's one thing we're learning here. Like, yeah, people need to. I have. This is one of those empirical questions, though, that I almost wonder if maybe it's better not to study it because it's going to be really, really hard to study. In any case, as long as we're just doing the kind of empirical speculation that probably upsets a certain kind of social scientists to hear philosophers doing. As long as we're doing that. With respect to the first point there, I guess I'm a little bit skeptical. I think that I've heard at least some things that Dawkins has said that give me the sense that he has a slightly romantic view of ordinary child psychology. Like he seems to oftentimes think, oh, like children are just like little scientists or something. If you just leave them their own devices, they'll all be like little critical thinking scientists. And I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical of that. I think that some kids are like that, but then a lot of kids aren't. And so probably I would guess like in this future where we have a vast array of empirical literature on this, I doubt that we're going to find that like most children are doing this rigorous analysis. It's just like eventually they learn that the Father Christmas thing was all lies, and they move on, to the next thing without ever really exercising their rational faculties. With respect to the authority thing, this probably reflects some kind of worldview difference between Dawkins and me. I do think that a problem in the world today, hashtag, is that people don't have, they don't trust those institutions that we need to be able to trust to the degree that like people need to in order to have a stable society. And that's why I'm in the US, but like, I think you all have kind of this similarly unstable socio-political situation right now as well. It's right. It's like we need to have trusted institutions, trusted authorities that people recognize as such. And so maybe I don't view it as the great thing that he does, that we have authorities that are kind of like undermining themselves intentionally before children. Maybe the authority figures would be better served, and we'd all be better served if the authority figures were thinking, how should I act so as to merit the trust of children and other people for that matter. So
that's fair. I mean, I think thinking on it now, Dawkins' point was specifically about prima facie absurd supernatural claims. So he's maybe not saying that you shouldn't trust institutions generally when they tell you facts about evolution in a university setting, say. But he is saying that when general epistemic authorities tell you facially absurd supernatural claims like Christianity is true or Father Christmas is real, children should have a sort of healthy skepticism about these claims. I'm not saying Christianity is true, is facially absurd one way or the other, but that's his general point. So the specific category of claims he's narrowing in on are the kind of grand supernatural ones that have to do with religion or Father Christmas.
Right. So I hear you, but I wonder if he's not trying to sort of to eat his cake and have it too. There, I guess that my worry is that like eroding trust in purportedly trustworthy authority figures ends up maybe having deleterious long-term consequences that that people they like overlearn the skepticism lesson and just become like skeptical about everything and want to do their own homework about like vaccines and like really in evolution and the like whether the world is round or whatever. It's like like maybe the better epistemic environment is where children learn that like these people that I'm kind of expected to trust are worthy of my trust. Anyway, that was the thrust of my response anyway.
Yeah. So like that definitely could be true, but maybe one way of doing it as a parent, I'm obviously not a parent, but one way of doing it as a parent might be you tell the children this one lie as a rite of passage that is supposed to increase their enjoyment of Christmas, but also teach them critical thinking skills and a healthy skepticism of authority when they tell you grandiose supernatural claims. But then just lie about anything else and be reliably trustworthy on every other issue, be perfect Kantians in every other respect when they're telling their children things. I mean, couldn't that strike the perfect balance between the two?
I will concede this much, right? If there's a situation in which parents and in society more broadly are deciding to perpetuate, the Father Christmas story by lying, specifically because they want to make like really good critical thinkers of their children. That would be like if that were the situation, or if that becomes the situation, then I probably won't be writing tweets like I did. But then it strikes me that we're not in a situation like that. This is certainly not the conscious motive of most people. I think most people are just sort of going along with this tradition because like it's kind of always been done. It was done with them, so it's like they do it with their children. And kind of what I'm saying is not that they're doing something morally heinous and wrong and they're blameworthy, and they're not. They're just like going along doing what other people do. But maybe they ought to stop and reflect. And if their reflection, so I hope the reflection just makes them want to try to be truthful all the time. If it doesn't, then like I would consider this a much healthier alternative. They say, okay, like I'm gonna lie to my kids about Father Christmas specifically because I want them to be like really, really good critical thinkers. That would be a vast improvement for sure.
Yeah. So you're saying that there might be a good reason to lie to children about Father Christmas, but it's not the actual reason for the vast majority of parents. And so if you can get parents to just think about the reasons that they have for lying to their children, some will agree with you, and some maybe will agree with Richard Dawkins, but the overall situation would be much better because people would be acting for the right reasons.
Yeah, that's right. That would be enough better that like I wouldn't say and write grumpy things about this topic in that world. I would gripe about other things.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that means we've covered everything. We've covered the deontological argument against lying to children and the utilitarian one. So I'll just hand it over to you. Any final words?
No, but thanks for the invitation. It was fun. This is actually not something that I had spent a ton of time thinking about, and I think I learned a good deal from our exchange here. So I appreciated all of the pushback and the objections. Yeah, this is great. And thank you a lot.